Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our ExxonMobil Oil Spill Response Knowledge Transfer webinar. As the name stands, so we're trying to get seasoned experts to come to our webinar to pass on their knowledge. So this year we are going to keep our original schedule. So we'll host the webinar every first Tuesday of the month from 10 to 11:15 a.m. U.S. Houston time. And we'll give the speaker 1 hour to speak, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes for questions. And the questions can only be typed in through Q&A button. For your information, we are going to record the whole webinar series, both audio and video. I put a link in the meeting invite. We're trying to upload the recordings ASAP. And now I will give the floor to my colleague, Tim Nadwat, to introduce our speaker today.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm Tim Nedwed. This is our first webinar of 2023. We took a month off, and then we had a kind of a scheduling challenge in February. So we're in March now, and we are very lucky to have Erich Gundlach, who has a lot of experience, and Lynn and I've seen some of his slides, and I've heard him speak before, and he's really a great speaker and has a lot of experience that he's going to share with us. So I'm going to introduce him, but before I do that, I wanted to give a kind of a preview of what's going to happen with the webinar series over the next couple of months. And so next month we have Robert Lim keyed up. Robert Lim is the CEO of OSRL, and he's actually retiring, I think, at the end of this month. And so I thought it was an opportune time to get, because he has a lot of experience and he's been running OSRL for a long time. So it's an opportune time to get Robert to speak with us and transfer some of the great information that he has to us. And then in the month after that, so it's March, April, and May, we're going to have Ed Levine conduct a roundtable, because he had an excellent idea, and there's a lot of Coast Guard people, and we haven't had Coast Guard oil spill responders come on. So he's got some high-level responders who've been incident commanders from some major events, and so we're going to have a roundtable discussion, I think, with 3 of those folks to get their insights as well. And so that'll be a little bit different than what we've done in the past, and Ed's going to help us manage that, because he has relationships with these Coast Guard folks as well. So those are the next 2 months after this. And then over the summer, starting in June, we hope to start a series for Oil in the Sea 4. So stay tuned for that. So Oil in the Sea 4 is a book that National Academy's just prepared and published last year. And we're going to start with an overview of that effort by the leader of that effort, who is also Ed Levine. So he was the coordinator of that project. And then we haven't decided exactly how many months, but over the next 5 or 6 months, we're going to have sessions each month for the individual chapters. So there'll be quite a bit of information related to Oil in the Sea 4 as we move into the summer and maybe through the end of the year. So that's the playbook for the webinar series as we go through 2023. So stay tuned for that. So as I said, Erich Gundlach is going to be the speaker today, and Erich is on the list because every time I have a speaker, I ask them who they think should be speakers for us, because I didn't have a relationship with Erich, and I'm not sure how that happened, because I didn't know him, but several of the previous speakers, Ed Owens, Dave Dickens, Al Allen, suggested that Erich needs to be on our list for the webinar series. So I met Erich late last year at the International Oil Spill Science Conference, and I heard him speak about a topic similar to what he's going to speak about today. And as I said, he is an excellent speaker and has a lot of information. So I'm really looking forward to his talk. So he gave me a couple sentences, but as we have tried to do with previous speakers, Erich has a slide or two that's going to go into the depth about his kind of background and career. So what I'm going to do is just a high level thing. So let me get started with that, and then I'll pass it over to Erich. So the title of his talk is, as you see there, Oil Spill Assessment and Cleanup Throughout the Ages. Dr. Erich Gundlach is a coastal geomorphologist who has participated in the early stages of oil spill investigation, dating back to his first study of the Matula spill site in 1975 with Miles Hayes. In fact, I told Erich that Al Allen was our first speaker, and that we have seasoned experts, and he says he's not quite as seasoned as Al Allen because Al attended the first International Oil Spill Conference, and Erich didn't get involved until the second International Oil Spill Conference. So he's not quite as seasoned as Al, but he's been around a while, so he has a lot of information. So since that effort with Matula spill, he's been involved as a researcher, scientific advisor, or part of the spill management team on numerous spills in the United States and internationally. He has published extensively on the interaction of oil pollution and sediments, environmental sensitivity analysis, emergency response management, and the physical and biological effects of oil pollution. When not working oil spills, he has been involved with the environmental assessment and spill response planning on several major pipeline projects and oil field investigations throughout Latin America and in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He is currently project director in Nigeria of the largest cleanup and restoration of contaminated mangroves ever undertaken, and an advisor to the United Nations Environmental Program regarding oil and gas development in Uganda. So with that, Erich, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thanks again. Erich, you're on mute if you're...
Okay, I was muted there for a second. Great, it's a pleasure to be with you all. I am focusing on oil shoreline interactions. And this first slide is from 1978. It's the Amoco Cadiz spill, and it kind of symbolizes what we're talking about. You see to the right, there's a sand beach loaded with oil. Oil is on the surface of the beach, and then it extends out. And in the foreground, we have a very rocky shore also coated with oil. So that's a good slide to introduce us to the topic. I'm going to go over a few major spills in history. It's important to get the context of how did we get these standard oil spill assessment procedures and ideas? Where did this come from? SCAT just doesn't happen. ESI, Environmental Sensitivity Index, doesn't happen. It came from the Matula spill in Chile, which you see on the top here, Urquiola spill in Spain, Amoco Cadiz in France, and then, of course, the granddaddy of all spills up to the Deepwater Horizon was the Exxon Valdez in Alaska. And then I'll skip briefly to Puerto Rico, to Maryland, because there are marshes and mangroves. And then I'll be ending with impact of oil to mangroves of a current study that we're undertaking in the Niger Delta. There are photos and references available through my website is oilspillinfo.com. You see on the bottom there. And all the publications are on researchgate.net. So all the information that I'm about to present is readily available to you. And I want to say on the slide to the right with a big apple, all I really need to know I learned in kindergarten. Well, I learned it in 1975 through 1989 with the Exxon Valdez. And a lot of those lessons from them are apropos today. So we don't want to forget those early lessons just because they were a long time ago. Who am I? As background, I'm a coastal geomorphologist. I studied with Miles Hayes on the interactions of shorelines with the coastal marine systems, which can be applied to rivers and to lakes. I've been a participant in many of the largest oil spills in history. I've been very fortunate to have done so. I'm a participant in the co-development of the Environmental Sensitivity Index. The oil spill model, I've also worked with Mark Reed to develop that model. And my principal expertise is shoreline spill mapping, management, SCAT, remote sensing, anything to do with oil spills, more the physical and the interactions with shorelines. I do oil spill cleanup advisement. I've done it numerous times. And when I'm not working oil spills, which is most of the time, of course, there's other things to keep one occupied, and I do environmental and social impact assessments, oil fields, pipelines, refineries, power plants, mining operations. I've provided expert testimony for a large number of years, and I'm proud to have worked for all parties. So I view myself as an independent consultant. I work for governments. I'm currently with the United Nations and previously with the World Bank Group. Industry, of course, with Exxon, you'll see, with Amoco in the old days, and with law firms. For fun, I put together a map of where I've worked, and you can see it's pretty extensive, and I've divided into oil spill planning, and environmental and social impact assessment. So in much of North America, going from near the North Slope, the Brooks Range, and in the right-hand corner to Antarctica. I've been fortunate to do the spill contingency plans for North Pole Station and McMurdo. And going above in Asia, I was on the Montaro oil spill investigations in Indonesia, and a lot of work in Europe, as well as into Africa, which I'll be ending up and ending with, and I'm currently working in Uganda with the United Nations. So Tim asked, how did you get started in it? Well, I was first in, graduated a master's at the University of New Hampshire, and then I was, in those days, jobs were a little tough. They weren't readily available, and Peace Corps was a good alternative. So I ended up teaching at the university level in Chile, in Valparaiso. And when that stint ended and I went back to join the university at South Carolina with Miles Hayes, and this is really unusual. The day I walked into his office, outside of his office door, he gets a call from the National Science Foundation to go investigate a spill in Chile, which you see down here. So I had just come from Chile, obviously, and spoke Spanish and knew people down in Patagonia. 2 weeks later or a month later, we were on a plane back to Chile to start the investigations of the oil spill in Patagonia, which I'll talk extensively about. That developed into the spill in Spain, and that developed into the Amoco Cadiz with NOAA, and the rest is history. So it's just a very strange and unique set of circumstances that it happened. I want to give some recognition to the early influencers and some later ones as well. That includes Ralph Perhack with the National Science Foundation, Wilmot Hess and John Robinson with NOAA. They put the NOAA program on the map today. Miles Hayes, of course, from South Carolina, who recently passed away. And Ed Owens and Jackie Michelle were students and colleagues of mine, of course, with oil spills and Carry the Flag as well. But I also want to stress that, or give acknowledgements to Jack Gallagher and Dave Barry from Gallagher Marine Systems for my participation with them in the spill management team and their application of incident command system to oil spills, which you'll see in the Maryland spill a little bit. So thanks to those folks. So let's talk about how we got here. And I assume that most people know oil spills, and oh yeah, we know a little bit about the history of it, but I call this the very early years. So 1967, the Torrey Canyon made mega news worldwide, 119,000 tons right off the coast of the west coast of the UK. Biological investigations, of course, it's noted for its wrong applications of dispersants, which tarnished the dispersant use in the United States for over a decade. And I want to note that ITOP was established as a result of the Torrey Canyon, 1968. So that's the International Tanker Owners Pollution Fund, which are spill advisors to the tanker industry and to governments, and one of the big three that I call the big three, with NOAA and CEDRA in France, that provide technical expertise to oil spills. So that's when they started. 1969, we had the Santa Barbara spill. You can see it off to the right here, a blowout off the coast of California, smaller amount, 13,000 tons. Earth Day began after that, and then the US EPA starts in 1970. So you see the pattern, big oil spill, oh my God, what are we going to do? We have to do something, and so ITOP for the tanker owners, EPA for the US government, and then 1970 was the Arrow spill, and that Environment Canada became heavily involved, and Bunker C oil, 10,000 tons, and it's still there. So Torrey Canyon, 1967. Why do I go back to this? Because we are using some of the same techniques that we see today. So, and I've itemized the two that I'm going to talk about in other parts of this is berm relocation, sediment washing. And you see the folks down here are washing the sediments, pressure flushing, and they're pressure flushing the wall, so high and low pressure. On the right-hand side is where the spill occurred. And just note that when it all the way across to France, this section of Brittany here, and this is the photograph from Brittany in 1967. And notice this is a castle in the background, which you'll see later. This is the granite coast of France. And you'll see other spills in that area coming up. So 1967, Torrey Canyon. Then we entered the opening of the modern era. And that's 1974 to 1976. I want to stop just for 1 second. Just in the 1970s, that Miles Hayes and students were initiating shoreline surveys in Alaska, which led to the ESI and some of the techniques that we're using today. So just a little early recognition. 1974, the Metula happened in Chile, and they requested Coast Guard assistance. So the Coast Guard and a professor from Texas and A&M, Roy Hand, went down and provided assistance to offload and to do initial investigations. 1976 in the United States was the Argo Merchant. And this is the birth of modern spill response, according to NOAA, which I agree with. This is the Office of Response and Restoration was starting to be established. They responded with personnel to that spill, and I put their website because they're the second group I told you of the big three. So they go back to 1976. And my participation with them, I attended one of the first Argo Merchant Conference at that time. So key events in the learning sequence. I want to take you down to the southern area of Patagonia, Chile, on the border of Argentina. 52,000 tons of Saudi Arabian crude oil, a couple thousand tons of bunker oil in 1974. So why is this important? It's got oil impacts to coarse sand and gravel shorelines, tidal flats, marshes, and no cleanup. So this is a laboratory case of what happens in northern climates, far north or far south climates from an oil spill. So this is, I call it the Mecca of all oil spill sites. So any of you out there that have an interest in oil spills, this is one of the sites to go to. And I list the Chilean scientists that went there in the early years, US Coast Guard, NOAA, National Science Foundation, South Carolina University. Jennifer Baker, famous ecologist, went there several times. NOAA went there as well. Ed Owens, Gary Sergi, Merv Thingus, 1986, 1998, 2005. ITOP went there, and I went there 75, 81, 95, 2015. So lesson, coastal processes affect oil deposition and persistence. And those coastal processes are waves, tides, currents, tidal and wind driven, sediment movement along shore, the beach cycle, I'll talk about erosion deposition, grain size, presence of vegetation. And the Metula site represents one of the first applications of rapid and detailed study sites. So let's see how that works. The lesson, oil is removed from the active shore phase. Well, this is kind of obvious now. On the picture on the left is the oil coming on shore. You can see the heavy mousse, the chocolate mousse is the oil water emulsion. And here we have a year later, we have this band of oil along the upper shoreline. This is algae, algal fronds offshore. And here's the shoreline picture. So this is the active beach face. Of course, that the waves have reworked this. And so the oil is residing on the upper part. How did it get there? It got there during high tides and probably a storm sequence that pushed the oil up there. And so we need more energy to remove that oil because it's out of the major wave action. So the lesson, this is the origin of the ESI. So the environmental sensitivity came in 1976. This is the first time we've looked at oil spills. The Erich also coming later also influenced it, but it did influence it. It also influenced the Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Technique, or SCAT, in 1990. Why? Because we had aerial overflights and we had detailed and rapid survey sites to map the shoreline oiling and coastal environments. And off to the right, you see that 1975-76 oiling is into light, moderate, and heavy. We have the grounding sites. And down the bottom here, we have the study sites shown. So some of those early techniques came during the Metula spill. This, to my knowledge, is the first use of a field sketch to map spill locations. So this is the Miles Hayes sketch showing oil on the beach ridges and a sketch of the waves coming in and the berm location. And those sketches came from Alaska studies. Here we have a sketch from 1970. So I will show you during Exxon Valdez sketches, and this is the origin of those sketches. And why do we do a sketch rather than just photographs? Because a sketch forces you to make observations of where the oil is, where the staining is, where exposed peat listed on the top area is. It slows you down to make really good observations. Lesson, this is the first use that I know of pits and trenches to map subsurface oil. And here we have Anne Blount sitting in the oil, and you can see the oil has penetrated into the upper berm of the gravels here. And here's the detailed map of the different concentrations of oil within that sediment, within the beach. So let's review some of the major observations. And I just like this photograph of the first Narrows. The Atlantic Ocean is out here, and the ship was coming through the first Narrows and is actually probably right under the plane taking the photograph. This is a year later, and we're going to take you down to the shoreline where it's circled over here. So we have two critical areas. I'm going to take you first to Puerto Espora, and this black rim is oil. This is oil asphalt pavement out here. And then I'm going to take you to the marsh over here. So let's look at that asphalt pavement. This is a year after the spill in 1976, 2 years after, sorry. And you can see the asphalt pavement is solid. The oil came in here, settled into the gravels, and there's very little coastal processes, wave action to remove it. There is some, you can see some erosion along the scarp, but it's a slow process. This was a mounting object for the ferry that used to come in here, and it's a good place to mark it so we can look at it. Here's 40 years later in 2015, and we see the remnants of that gravel penetration into the oil penetration into the gravels. So it's still there, and actually if you start digging into it, you can still get some of that brown coloration of that initial oil, that mousse that came ashore. So this is a sheltered gravel environment. It would be similar to the Arctic slope, that you have the gravels with minimum wave action, and it stays around a long time. So another lesson, oil passes across a compact tidal flat. So on the left-hand side, I show you, this is a tidal flat out here. It's a sand flat in the middle, and there's a small sand, muddy, silty beach on the top here. So this is the picture along this top edge here. And you can see that the oil is just residing on top of that clay. So the clay is very compact, it's very hard, it's water saturated with the tide, so the oil just settles on the top. So that's a lesson, that it's a limited penetration, and that oil will strand on the upper shoreline and not coat the big flat that you see off to the left. So now we have marshes, and this is the granddaddy of all marsh impacts. So here it is in February 1976. And I'm going to take you down to that shoreline right there. This is 1 year after, and you can see exactly where the oil came up to. It came up to that height, it coated here with tar, and it spread off into the marsh in the background. So this is a different type of marsh. It's not our mid-latitude Spartina grasslands, but it's Salicornia, and this is a shrub, Sueda. It's called Sueda, was the genus name, and it provided the marsh structure for that area. So impacts were severe and initially several centimeters thick. You can see the scale, and on top, it was on top of this clay underneath that formed the basis of the marsh itself. And you can see some of the Salicornia actually growing on top of the marsh in this case. And you can see the heavy moose off to the left that's still underneath this surface. So I want to point out that Dr. Jennifer Baker said if oil is greater than 2.5 centimeters an inch, you need to remove the oil to aid recovery. So just remember that as we look at some of these other spills. Here we have it 40 years later. So we still see that same tar structure on the surface here going into the channel. And beneath the surface, you can see that the oil is relatively thin in this case, but still there, very much still there. You can see some of the Salicornia has grown over the same area, but where the mud is exposed, that oil can be underneath. Where John Bauer from Alaska is digging, it can be buried 4 to 10 centimeters beneath, and there's actually still some liquid mousse visible in this upper left-hand photograph. Looking at another part of the marsh, it was actually keyed with plots to track growth. We had about a 35% plant recovery after 40 years. And we still see that oil tar mousse on the surface, and you see that mousse very evident underneath here. Scientists from Canada did an analysis of that prior to this, but they still found those light ends, the N-alkanes, C12 to C16. And my thing is you could actually smell the oil, and it's not just asphalt. It was still liquid underneath there, and that's because it was a semi-arid conditions, very cool, it doesn't get high temperatures, and there's very little bacterial degradation, of course, under the surface. So the value of the Metula spill, it's a field laboratory for large oil quantities spilled in a high latitude environment, and it's still there, and you're welcome to go back again, please. Plant recolonization is slowly proceeding. It's 35 to 70% after 40 years, depending on which area you look at. It's growing on top of weathered oil, and its growth on sediments overlying the buried oil. Recolonization is hindered by thick oil concentrations, and going back to Baker, she found recolonization is very little in thicker oils, 4.1 centimeters, but less. But it does occur if it's less than the 2.4 centimeters. So that's where I get that 2.5 centimeters or less, roughly 1 inch. So this is illustrative of long-term spill persistence. And my estimate in 1982 was 100 years, and people said, why, oh my gosh. But here we're at 40 years with those photos, and I'm sure it's there at 50 years, so maybe it will last to 100. So I'm going to take you to one event while we were finishing up the Metula studies. Another spill occurred. A spill occurred that was a live spill. So Miles said, all right, guys, go to it and take a look at it. And I spoke Spanish, so I was common and obvious, and just finished the Metula studies, so it was obvious that I would go with the South Carolina team. 100,000 tons lost, 25 to 30,000 tons on shore, 215 kilometers of oiled shoreline. This is the wreck after it caught fire and blew up. It's a large story. They actually pumped off some of the remaining oil even after the fire. Heavy oil impacts on the shoreline, and you can see the picture off to the right. We're talking about that coast that sticks out into the Atlantic coast of Spain. So this, to my knowledge, and I may be wrong on it, but it's the first to do visual inspection sites using pit data. So because this was a live oil spill, that we did a whole number of sites, rapid survey sites, We called them visual inspection in those days, but these are rapid survey sites. And then we had the detailed sites, which are indicated by another symbol on the map here. But you can see that all the numbers here represents either detailed or rapid survey sites. And we also categorize the oil concentration as covering the shoreline as 65% of the intertidal was heavy, moderate was 25 to 65, and light was 25%. This is published in Environmental Geology in 1978. So we've seen this picture. Jackie Michelle actually showed it. I want to show you one more thing about it. There's wave reflection. This is the first time we've seen the live spill. And notice on the rocky shore that the oil is actually held offshore. But when you get this cobble boulder beach in the background, the waves come in, carry the oil, and oil that substrate. So that was the observation done at that time. So the steep rocky shores are relatively less sensitive than the boulder cobble beach in terms of oil hitting that area and persisting. So we had seeing large oil quantities on shorelines. So oil on Fine Beach, if you notice that the entire beach space is covered with oil. So this is a maximum holding capacity. You can't put any more oil onto that beach, and you can see the oil in the water offshore. So the lesson was heavy accumulations will cover that entire beach space. Whereas if it's lighter concentrations, they streaks and they concentrate along that upper shoreline. So of course, if you're going back in history to where to find the oil, this is the location obviously to look, because this is the active beach space, and the oil doesn't persist there because it's moving around. If you look at what we call fine grained sand beaches, these are compacted, they're hard, relatively hard, easy to walk on. And you can see where Miles is standing on the upper shoreline that there's a thin layer on top and clean sand and a oil underneath again. So this is the concept of oil penetration and burial. Oil penetration is where it settles by gravity into the beach face, into the beach. And burial is where it's buried by processes. And in this case, I'll show you a little bit later, it's a natural speech sequence. But notice on the beach face itself that it's actually, you see the sand underneath, and that's because the sand is water saturated. So the tidal water, when it was high tide, is now coming out of the beach and preventing the penetration of oil into the beach, and is actually washing off that oil. So this is the natural erosion depositional cycle. Here's a typical sequence from the UK. And you just see that there's this general movement of the sediments, and the course of the sediments, the more movement there is. So I showed you in that fine-grained sand beach, it's relatively minor. It's about 15 to 20 centimeters along that berm. This is called the upper berm, which would be this higher area here. So lesson, again, we saw it in Chile, we saw it 1 year after, but now we see 2 weeks later that same beach, that one that was heavily oiled, is now almost all clean of that beach face. The tide comes in, the tide comes out, the oil refloats and goes to the next beach and moves on and degrades on each step along the process. So there's probably a lot of slides in history on how not to do it. This was the first time I saw it, how not to do it, 1976. Here's the oil thinly on the surface, and they get a front end loader to scrape it all up. So after a week or several weeks of work, they got oil mixed into all the sediments. There's still oil on the surface as it came in later, and it's a real mess. I showed you from 1967 berm relocation and washing. This is the case of berm relocation. Unfortunately, they put it a little bit too low on the shoreline. You see the tractor still here. So they're taking this oiled sediment up here, rather than removing it, they're putting it into the surf zone to be reworked. So now we're increasing our grain size. So our grain size on coarse sand, high energy beaches, there's good wave action on this. And you can see this very large berm, oil settles in the back here and penetrates 10 centimeters and gets buried in 15 centimeters here. Oops, sorry. and gets buried on the order of 35 to 40 centimeters into the beach. So we did a time sequence of it, and you can see that as the berm moves and those oil remnants get buried deeper and deeper, and some get removed, of course, with the wave action and the changing in the beach sequence. And there's deeper penetration in gravel cobble beaches. In this case, this is a pebble size beach, and oil penetrated 65 centimeters into this beach. So cleanup is that much more difficult on these beaches. So this is the after the Erchiola spill. So we've seen the past spill from Chile, the live spill from the Erchiola, and we were doing work for NOAA at the time, and Miles came up with a ranking of the shorelines of 1 to 10. And whereas the exposed rocky shorelines that you saw and the sediment size are in the mid-range, and then the marshes are the more sensitive. And then as it developed, it says, well, that's not good enough, just shorelines aren't. You have to add the ESI, needs to have wildlife and socioeconomic information to it. Where are the bird rookeries, et cetera. So that the basis of it came from those spills at that time. Now I want to go to the Amoco Cadiz. And if you just look at the size of it, 233,000 tons, and it's almost right on the shoreline of Brittany, France, up to the right. So it lost steerage when it was going through the English Channel. Amoco was determined to be liable because of poor maintenance. It lost its rudder. So it lost its rudder and it just physically drifted ashore by winds. So the initial studies that I'll be talking about were sponsored by the NOAA, and I don't remember what it was called in those days, but it's NOAA ORNR nowadays. So we went over under their auspices. And we were integrated with the French institutes. There was a French institute right on the coast of Brest. And we worked together closely as collaborators and did many joint publications together with them. So this was the first case of, we really sat down and said, we know what we're doing. We did it in 1976. Actually, we did it on other spills as well. But now we know what we're doing. So let's do time sequence. We'll put in rapid survey stations. We'll put in detailed analysis stations. We'll do aerial mapping. We found in 2 weeks, 72 kilometers of shoreline was oiled. Then it increased to 320 kilometers due to that on-off shoreline movement of oil. This was the first oil spill mass balance, and we did a 10-year follow-up to the study. So here's the early map of the distribution of oil along that shoreline and the stations, et cetera. All in days pre GIS, Geographic Information Systems, computerized mapping. So I want to stress this was a phenomenal amount of oil. The oil here is all the way from the shoreline on the left figure, all the way out into the channel here. And you can see this is all oil coming in. And this is 100 kilometers from the spill site. This is a little bit further away, and you see an island here. The oil is coming through, and that island is actually blocking the oil from coming in. And you see it coming into the shoreline over here. And there's actually a small boom here to prevent the oil from going into the fish hatchery, which is there. So you can just see the size of it. I also showed you the Erchiola spill with wave reflection. Here's wave reflection again, coming off this rocky shore. The oil is held offshore, but it goes into the background, into this beach area with gravel shoreline, and that's where the oil resides. You can also see it in this gravel cobble beach here. But this rocky shoreline, because of that steep beach face, inhibits oil from going onto the shoreline. So here's Craig walking along the shoreline on March 25th, 1978. Oil goes from down there to way up here, and it's a low tide shot. And there's a bunker in the background. And why I'm showing this is because 1 week later, there's that bunker, and you can see the oil is residing on the top here. So oil, the oil on the lower low tide terrace, the lower beach face, was all lifted off as the tide came in. You can see the water there, and the compact nature of the sediments prevented oil from penetrating into that and remaining. Whereas this area, it was drier. The oil comes up there, penetrates in, is high on the shoreline. So it's longer lasting. The lesson, this is a shallow subtidal environment offshore here. This is a tidal flat exposed at low tide. The tides there are on the order of 10 meters, 8 to 10 meters. So that's a large tidal range with 30 feet. So when the tide is out, this is all an exposed sand flat, but below on the subtidal area, it's full of shellfish. And those shellfish were narcotized and came out of the sediments and washed up onto the shore by the hundreds of thousands. So we documented shoreline oiling time sequence. To my knowledge, this is maybe the first time that it was done for an actual spill that's occurring at the same time. So this was March, April 17th, 1 year later. And you can see the oiling was going down for that first year. And then note that what's this going up here in 1980? Well, unbelievably, in 1980, there was a spill just offshore here, the Tanyo, which oiled much of the same shoreline that the Amoco Cadiz oiled. And actually, this is the same area that was oiled by Torrey Canyon in 1968. So Amoco Cadiz in 78, and then Tanyo in 1980. So not a very fortunate area in terms of oil spills. So the important, another measure of the start of sequencing here is the documentation for an oil spill mass balance. And Wilmot Hess, who was running the NOAA program at that time, said, well, we need to know where the oil is going. Is it onshore, offshore, in the bottom sediments? Where is it? So the first thing we looked at was the shoreline, which we knew because we had depth of oiling calculations, percent coverage. So we could work at a calculation that Ken Finkelstein published in 1981, that if you know the length and the width of the beach and the thickness of the oil and the mousse content and the percent coverage, that you could calculate how much oil is on the shoreline. And so we did an onshore calculation, and then we did subtidal sediments, water column, how much was biodegraded. We had some preliminary information, evaporation, rough amounts. And still we couldn't account for 46,000 tons, 20%, a lot. But we also could say a time sequence of how long it actually lasted on the shoreline, this diagram to the right. So that in the nearshore areas, it goes away rapidly. So it reaches its maximum concentration of oiling and then rapidly drops. Shoreline lasts a little longer. And the abers, which are interior estuaries, it even lasts longer. So we developed a time sequence published in Science in 1983. Cleanup, we see some of those same processes we saw in 1967 at the Torrey Canyon. Berm removal, pressure flushing, cleanup of the rocky shorelines, which we hadn't seen before. So now we have our initial oiling on it. The French cleanup process was to remove all the liquefied oil that they could. You see there's still black oil on the rocks. And then 2 years later, we did a study with Erich Topinka that came back and measured the algal regrowth, which was similar to what it was before, but the dominant species had shifted. But you can see fairly good recovery after 2 years. And I'll show you after Exxon on the same type sequence. Exxon Valdez. Cleanup, not so good. We saw it again, front end loader, removing a bucket full of sand with a tiny bit of oiling. And one of my pet peeves for oil spills is the use of trenching. We came back to this area 8 years later, and you poke a shovel in there and that oil is still within the sediments. So by trenching, and the intentions were good, we're going to concentrate the oil and then pump the oil out from the beach, but the execution was poor. It wasn't fully cleaned out so that the oil remains in those trenches for a long time. And I don't recommend trenching in marshes or even on the shoreline for those reasons. Ile Grande Marsh is everybody in the oil spill business from those days and probably 20 years after. This was the lesson on how not to do it. I met the scientist who blocked, he said, we want to block the oil off from moving through this small channel and oiling other areas. So we're going to hold the oil into it, and it concentrated very thickly in this area. And they called out the army, came out there with equipment over the marsh and shovels and buckets and everything to get that oil out of there. So a year later, it's blackened. You can see the raw sediments here. Most of this was tidal flat, but it's totally scraped off. The photograph to the right shows what that area in the back here over here looks like. It's all dug up from all the equipment on it. A year and a half later, where Serge Bernet from France is digging in, you can see oil in the channels where it resides. And then Ernest Seneca from the University of North Carolina worked with their French counterparts to replant the area, or replant much of the area in about 2 years after the spill. So I'm going to jump ahead 7 years. What does it look like after 7 years then? Okay, we've got the marsh is recovered. It looks quite good because of that replanting. This is the ground shot. It's early spring, so it's not greenish. But you can see that for the most part, it's good. But there is oil in the channels. You can go back there, I'm sure today, this was 23 years after, by French researchers, found oil still in those channels that I showed you with Serge Bernet digging into it. So that's where the oil is in those soft mud sediments. I'm going to skip over this quickly for time sequence. That we're looking at the COSOIL model came out of this. And this is a model that brings oil onto the shorelines. And it has various components of shore, backshore, foreshore, etc. I'm sorry about the quickness of this. Moving ahead here, but essentially we're saying that depending on the shoreline type, that oil will last there longer. And that's what that model incorporates with foreshore, backshore, and the surf zone. And you can calculate how much oil goes onto the shoreline. But this report was updated by a very good report done by colleagues for the Minerals Management Service, and this review of all these models. So that's an important part. And I'm going to move ahead. Post-Amicocades, CEDRA comes into the business. So the big three are in place: ITOP, NOAA, and CEDRA. Amicocades, I'll try to go over this quickly, even though it's a little hard to. 37,000 tons, 10,000 workers, 1,000 boats, big, better, more. The first use of GIS mapping of oil concentrations. And fortunately, I was doing a project in the area and had the system ready to go. So by my working with the state of Alaska, we were able to produce oil impact maps at day 3, very quickly after. You know, heated water was used right onto the shoreline to get the oil off because it was very sticky to the rock surface. It was directly from a boiler barge. I'm putting this Oil in the Environment book out here because this summarizes years of research effort by many researchers. And I include this plot of rockweed and infauna on the rocky shorelines here because everybody says, oh, it never recovered. Well, the rockweed recovered after year 3, and the infauna reached a parallelism, which means it didn't come up to its previous level, but it's stabilized at a lower level, which indicates that climate change or other aspects may be involved with it. It also was innovative because we had to standardize oiling levels between all parties. I worked for ADAC, the state of Alaska, Ed Owens with Exxon, and then Jackie Michelle with NOAA. And we wanted to all get on the same page. So, okay, how much is heavy? How much is moderate? How much is light? And then, well, maybe if it's 50% coverage, it's still wide, medium, narrow, heavy, light, moderate, etc. And then coming up with diagrams for it. So that's an innovation. Innovation of characterization of subsurface oil. All right, so this is 1989. We get our SCAT procedures here. Innovation, shoreline segmentation. So Exxon designated it. I don't know who in Exxon, but obviously we all have to work on the same location. But this is standard procedures, standard operating procedures for SCAT surveys. Tracking persistence. We tracked it through summer of 1993, decreasing rapidly. And then how are we going to follow up on it? Now we've got the same sketch that I showed you from the 1970s is back in business again, showing where the oil is and serves as a basis for follow-ups to it. Okay, oil was found there in 1991. Let's go back and take a look. And which we did. So this is a sequence of oiling. You can see this is by square meters. This was found in that same survey year, 51,000 meters, dropping to 4,300 meters, dropping to 2,800 meters. And Ed Owens did a similar diagram on a log scale for several spills, Arrow Bios study and the Exxon Valdez. But you can see this is the general curve that I showed you before with the Cosoil model. It's this exponential curve and decreasing rapidly and then staying around for a long, long time. So where is the oil and why is it still there? This is sequestration. And the simple answer is physical and biological processes are unable to remove or degrade the remaining oil. Similar, if these processes were active, oil wouldn't be there. So Gary, I want to give credit to David Page, Gary Pope, Michelle Bufordel, Jackie Michelle, Ed Owens, and whoever else has put forth opinions of why oil is there. And I'm going to give a case example from 1989. We're going to go to that site and follow up on it. And we're going to dig a hole in 2008. So that's 20 years later. We're going in and digging more, pulling out rocks, and underneath there, yes, there is oil, and it's buried below 15, 30 centimeters of no oil, oiled sediments, and then low to no oiling with depths below this oiled layer. So here's why it's not there in the top surface, because you have flow through those sediments, oil is removed, plus that's where the cleanup focused on and was able to get it out. Below that layer of boulder cobbles that you see here, that's where the oil resides, and it's inhibited from penetrating deeper because the oil fills any surface that are opening, any pore space that is opening, and is inhibited because there's water filled below it, so it can't go any deeper. Pope found the same thing. He put a piezometer tube, which just fills it with water, and he found in those boulder cobble surface areas that oil flows out rapidly, but you get into those bottom sediments and it just doesn't move. And doesn't move, this is a velocity curve, the reds and greens, or it's moving rapidly, but as you get down here, it just doesn't go anywhere. So there's no water flowing through it, no biodegradation, no limited aeration, it's just sitting there. Bufordel et al. Found similar things. Hydraulic conductivity decreasing with depth. And he's got here's a system that he set up in this boulder cobble beach. So underneath there's some oil that's hidden behind bedrock outcrops. So it's a combination of this bedrock outcrops that Page described and Bufordel does as well, and this lack of movement through it. So the advancements of post-Exxon Valdez, look at this, Oil Pollution Act, Natural Resource Damage Assessments, phasing out of double-hull tankers, requirement of the spill management team, MARPOL Convention, amended for double hulls, shoreline cleanup assessment technique, SCAT, incident command system, net benefit analysis, environmental benefit analysis. And I got this quote that it was probably first used on the gravel washing study that was performed for Exxon. So major things post-Exxon Valdez. So I'm going to try to move to the present now. And I call this new tricks building upon the past. So lessons that we learned in kindergarten and through the Exxon Valdez, and of course later, are applied to the Niger Delta mangroves. This includes cleanup and restoration, and mangrove habitat is one of the most important worldwide, especially in the subtropical areas, for fisheries resource, wood supply, etc. Quickly, peck slip, damage to mangroves. 1978 was my first oil spill in mangroves. And here we have Jeff Scott, and that was our PPE at the time, a pair of shorts. And you can see oil roots in here, and we made a map of where the oil was into this area to the right. That's an infrared shot of mangroves. And coming back 3 months later, they're all dead, where it was heavily oiled and heavily oiled on the plant stem. And we have Chuck Getter in here, and you can see the opening is enabling all the sunlight to come through. So plants are dead. We also have the Swanson Creek Marsh in 2000. Why this was important? Because we used planting as remediation. Heavily oiled marsh area, see our normal flushing system, and then putting in plants on the order of 25,000 plants after the flushing, and was approved by the authorities to do so. 1 year later, 0 on the left. 1 year later, the arrows are the same location, looking good. 2 years later, looking even better. So this is 1 year on where Bart Baca is measuring plants, and 2 years later, very good recovery. A good example of possibilities. Also, flushing will release subsurface oil. So we used it on beaches, but now we're using it on subsurface subtidal sandbars, and it's working to get the oil out. So if we apply it to the Niger Delta, third largest mangrove habitat in the world, shown in green and red, the red indicates areas of mangrove loss, primarily from oil development and thievery in the oil pipelines that go through these areas. We're looking off to the right is 1,000 hectares of oil mangroves. And this is the map source. I want to give credit to Liu et al. 2021, and then we augmented it for our area in this area. So mangroves are sensitive to large repeated oil losses. We know cleanup will never get all the oil out. We have to do scat methods need to be modified for the mangrove habitat. Planting shows mangroves are able to survive, and plants aid phytoremediation of the sediments. So let's see what happens. Here's our red, black, and white mangroves. Sometimes they're called a little different, so the Latin names are given here. And there's some zonation, but you can see the types that are present. This was areas exposed to multiple spills. This was 2 years after the spills of 2008 that initially killed most of the area. So this is, you can see the repeated oiling of this area is not just one spill. It was actually 65 documented spills and numerous other non-documented. For those that are not aware, oil theft and refining is illegal refining is common in the Delta. The hot tapping the pipeline. This is a steel pipeline that the thieves put in to transport oil from the active Trans-Nigeria pipeline to their refining site. This is a defunct refining site that has the barrels that they use to refine crude, and the asphalt that's thrown around, the waste from the refining process. And if the boat is captured, this was a 30-meter boat that was captured and burned by the authorities. Before and after, before on the left, after on the right, major losses of mangrove habitat. Can mangroves survive? We planted 343 mangroves and studied them for 3 years, and we found 67% survival, even in heavily contaminated areas. On the left, I'm showing the plants after 2 months, and here we have our UNEP and other representatives here, and this is after 4 years. Easily 2.5 meter plants. Oil concentrations, we found that it's not related to survival, that these plants can actually survive close to and in heavily oiled sediments. This site one, this is 3 years after, and these are the plants that have grown that we planted, and that's 9,800 milligrams per kilogram, 17,800 high levels, and you can see where our team is standing and at pit 1, and there's the picture of pit 1, and you dig into it and it's quite heavily oiled. So these plants in this area have a high tolerance to total petroleum hydrocarbons. For scat, the area is gridded, not segmented. So and we follow the boundaries of streams and channels, things that we can locate within the flat mangrove habitat area. Mangrove mud and oil is different than our sand beaches and cobble beaches. There's no definitive boundary of where the oiling begins and ends. And note that there's oil on the groundwater here. There's a continual groundwater sequence within those muds. So that if you look at the mud, you can say, well, that's a heavily oiled pit or a lightly oiled pit, which is what we've done. We've classified it into percent coverage of the water that comes in after about 2 to 3 minutes into that pit. And this correlates with chemistry, which a lot of people don't believe, but I'll show you how we use that. The chemistry is extremely variable. You'll take one sample. These samples are taken within 5 meters of each other. One has 107,000 off to the right here, 107,000. Next one has 12.4. Next one is 184. Wide variation, even within very short distances. So chemistry is really not the way to go, but the agencies in Nigeria insist on it being done. Oil is located in the top 50 centimeters. We core it into it. We don't find it going deeper. Beneath, it's located in mangrove muds. It's called Chukoko mud, mixture of mangrove roots, dead mangrove roots, and below that has a clay layer, which you can see here. It's denser, it's more compact, it's got water content to it and doesn't penetrate into it. Our lesson is to get that oil out of there. It's been there for 10 years or longer, since 2008. Energy is required. So we're using our flushing system, the same that we saw in that Maryland spill and the same we saw at all the other spills that I've shown you. This is the oil that comes out, this heavy, emulsified, loose, very thick stuff. Raking and tilling are required. This releases the oil, oxygenates sediments, and breaks up algal mat. I note that most of the guidance documents provided for mangroves do not do this. And this is a unique unique case that we've got 1,000 hectares of oiled mangrove sediments that we have to do something. If it sits there, it's going to be like the Batula spill. And it'll be there for forever. So SCAT is required for chemical verification, and it's got a list of things to do. SCAT is very diligent in it, in spite of being in a very difficult environment. And they've put in, can you imagine, over 7,000 pits where they've looked at oil levels. And this chemical verification question is a good one. This is the first case that in the Niger Delta that chemistry is being used to close out the environment. And the regulators agreed based on a net environmental benefit analysis and a health risk assessment that certain levels needed to be reached. And some of these levels are high, and lowest levels, 5,000, is in front of the community. So out of over 700 samples, we find very good correlation with this. Out of 700 samples, only 2 did not make the mark. So our ability to get SCAT out there to look at the observations and the oxygenating of the sediment is helping clean it. Innovation, massive mangrove planting. This is the first ever attempt of oil-contaminated mangroves at this scale. 2 million seedlings are planned to be put in place with a monitoring program of 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then 3 years by remote sensing. Why restore? Well, nothing much is happening. We did a remote sensing application, and we found, well, there was some regrowth around those areas, but it's only 4.8% of the entire area that needs to be done. Many people say, well, just wait and don't go in there anymore. This mangrove restoration to plant or not to plant. Well, it needs to be planted here, and it's agreed by the local community and the regulators. Two factors inhibit recovery: lack of a nearby seed source. You can see Barrington here, there's nothing around. There's no living mangroves. He's got the one living seedling here. And then there's re-oiling. If it gets oiled on the leaves, it's dead. The residents have set up nurseries. We got 1 million ready to go, and 2 million are required. 1 month monitoring, we find it's about an 11% loss of the plants the first time around. So the contractors go back in there and replant. So we've got a good basis for starting. Before and after shots, this is 2013. All this is actually oil on the surface. You can see some of the liquefied oil on it, dead mangrove plants. It's a island habitat in the distance. And here we have it in 2022. Plants are hard to see, but there's over 25 plants every 100 by 100 meters, a hectare. So, and they're doing well. So we're very pleased on that. So I'll give you the status as of November 22, and I'm getting very close to the end here, ladies and gentlemen. And I've got over 5 million cleanup worker hours. Hectares completed is 87%. Grids completed. We were well on the way of getting there. No fatalities, no lost work days, no lost time injuries. Amazing. And then this happened in November. So this is very, very sad for all people involved in the project, that for other issues related to our cleanup, we had 1,000 workers on the cleanup, and some ne'er-do-wells in the community got it in their bonnet that to get back at Shell Nigeria, that they would burn our camp to the ground and steal everything with it. And the Niger Delta is a tough place, and we hope to restart. Shell has committed to restart, and all parties, the community is willing to work with us to make things better and get us back on the road. So we hope by June to August that we're back out there to finish the job. So in summary, so this is the continuum since the mid-70s. So we have the early years, the modern assessments, the new procedures, and massive increase in equipment and planning as we go into the 1990s plus post Deepwater Horizon. So we had those early events, and we had ITOP formed. And then we had those middle events, the modern assessments, starting with Arrow, Argo Merchant, Metula, Urquiola, Ixtoc 1, Amoco Cadiz. So NOAA R&R comes into play, CEDRA comes into play, the ESI gets established, the Cosoil model is developed. New procedures, of course, lots out of Exxon Valdez. And Open 90 comes out, MARPOL 92, the Civil Liability Convention, SCAT, NEBA, ICS, all come out of the Exxon, post-Exxon Valdez days. Then we have this new stuff. Spills haven't stopped, unfortunately. Aegean Sea, same area as the Urquiola. Comey in Russia, Erika, Prestige off of Spain, France, Lebanon, Deepwater Horizon, and then the Bodo spills I talked about. And the advance, I believe, is that mangrove assessment and cleanup and rehab. And that's it, folks. And I appreciate your staying with me and ready to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. That's fantastic. I tell you, every time the speakers we've had in the past, and then these experiences that you were able to, you had two things going for you. One, there's maybe more incidents like this in the 70s and 80s, and number two, you were willing to spend a lot of time away from home working these incidents, right? And so I'm so impressed by that. Not that there were so many incidents, but your willingness to really sacrifice a lot of your probably time and time with your family to be away from home working these spills. But it's to the better of everybody else, because knock on wood, I don't think we haven't had the opportunity for the number of spills that you had the opportunity to work back in the 70s and 80s. And I think hopefully as we go forward, there'll be even less of them occurring. And so I say this all the time, but it's so important for us to learn from what you've done, because I think you have you and others have had unique experiences because of just the nature of operations back then and how and kind of continuous improvement is keeping those types of events from happening. So it's a fantastic talk. We're getting questions, and I'll go through that. And if you want, Eric, you can open up the Q&A. Let me just tell you that we're given guidance that for privacy reasons, you know, you can see the names of everyone that's putting the questions up. For privacy reasons, we're trying to not release those names as we go through them. So I'll go through the questions, but as we get questions, let me just ask you, you know, it's just fascinating listening to you talk, but I'm interested in some of the things that you've learned with the mangroves. And I think I heard that the key thing is to get kind of free oil out of those soils, right? So it's the free oil that goes up, because the mangrove roots, if they can get down into the soil, they can establish themselves. And as long as they aren't oiled above the soil line, they have a good chance for surviving. Is that accurate?
Right. The oil is in the top 50 centimeters, or really the top 30 centimeters. So we're cleaning that 50 centimeters. When we put the seedling in, it goes in 10 to 15 centimeters and grows rapidly to about 20 centimeters. So that's that critical part, and that's where we're focused on getting the oil out. That's what the oil is. So, you know, 97+% is in the top 50 centimeters. That's where the plants are. And as the root structure goes below that, there's less oil. So it just has to get through that boundary first.
How much cleaning do you have to get of that top 50 centimeters?
It depends on how oiled it is. It's complex. SCAT will go out there and let's say they find, well, it's 50% pit oiling. That doesn't pass. They have to go back to get less than 25%. They go back in and work. They say, we cleaned it. And look, it's gotten re-oiled. Well, the oil starts coming in slowly from the sides. So they'll flush here, but not over here, or they'll miss a spot. So they can go back in. They have to go back in multiple times if required. Some areas are relatively clean. They don't have much to do much at all. Other areas are just horrible.
But it's keeping the free oil from floating up out of these, right?
The oil is stuck in those sediments. It doesn't come out.
And then
it doesn't come out unless you have energy.
And then bioremediation, like adding nutrients, the soils are pretty anoxic, right? So even adding nutrients doesn't do a lot for you. Is that
exactly right? It doesn't do much for you, and adding nutrients causes an algal bloom on the surface. So it's a double negative. If you can imagine, we have clays and muds, and let's say you inject a nutrient or a bioremediant of some sort down there, it doesn't circulate out. So it's just stuck right there. All right, it does that little bit, but 10 centimeters over, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't get there.
So the challenge, lack of oxygen is the
lack of oxygen. So when we're flushing and doing all this raking and overturning, that's adding oxygen to the soil. So not only are we getting the oil out, but all of a sudden you got a load of oxygen going in there, and the biodegraders are active. So I didn't expect it to be that clean or that low TPH after the flushing, but I hadn't counted on adding all that oxygen into the sediments and really helping.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't. Boy, I must have really been kind of brain dead. This fire that you had, that happened after the International Oil Spill Science Conference? I don't remember.
It just happened after.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't
Yep,
remember.
we went. I had at the conference when was that? September, October.
Yeah.
I had said there's bad news, and I showed bad headlines on the horizon. You know, community is making unrealistic demands to Shell, and a month later that happened. Terrible.
It seems like Shell should have kept their kind of name out of it, I guess, for that. Isn't it more of a government collaboration with Shell? And
well, it was an ironic set of circumstances. Shell was doing what started the part of the start. There's community unrest. There's two vying factions. They overthrew the king. The other faction overthrew the king. So that doesn't help. But Shell had a hydrostatic test. well, Shell Nigeria is owned 60% by the government of Nigeria. It's not owned by Shell, The Hague or London. They would do a hydrostatic test. It leaked, which is good, all right, we fix it because there's no oil in it. And the community said this was the biggest oil spill in their history and demanded over $1 billion, $50,000 per man, woman, and child in the community as reparations for this big damage. So investigators went in with government and they slashed the tires and held the crew hostage. And that's all fomenting. They're saying the king has taken hundreds, tens of millions of dollars in payment and not giving it to the community. So it's terrible community unrest. All from the TikTok and whatever else media going through the community. Yeah. Wrong information, and we were the guys there, the guys they could get at. And
no, I can just imagine. I've never been to Nigeria, but I've been to Cameroon, and it's surprising. It's a democracy, but there's little kingdoms inside Cameroon, and it operates the same way it's done for hundreds or thousands.
Yeah, all this work is done under security forces, 3 gunboats, and we have guys with machine guns, and we're going to a field in an armored car, and our regulator staff has to be escorted by the military vehicles as well. It's a tough situation.
Yeah, no,
we all trying to stay positive to get through this.
Yeah, so that fire is a tough thing, because you put a lot of your time and effort, and a lot of people did, and I really feel for that. If you can bring up the Q&A, you can at least see, because there's a lot of comments here that are like kudos to your talk, and you can see who's given those to you. So the first one is great talk, Eric. Much appreciate your call outs for Miles. It was an amazing time to learn so much in the field. And then I think you're aware of this, but back in I guess in 2017, there are some dogs that went up to Prince William Sound, and they still found, the dogs were able to find.
Well, right. There's oil there. There's still oil there. That was hopefully a message. And thanks, Ed. I didn't know about the canine in the 2017 surveys.
And those dogs went to the Arrow spill, which is even further back in time, and found oil.
Yeah, and Kelly Marie McFarland. Yeah. Go ahead, read it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, okay, there's a typo. I think you can see that.
Yeah.
We got a comment here. Amazing body of work. We've all learned so much from those early spills and benefited from all the strategies that were developed. Thank you for this great talk. I second that for sure. Wonderful time trials for the history of oil spills. Glad to see the practical implementation of knowledge to areas around the world. Great work, Eric. Looking good. Okay, your work in Nigeria is awesome with so much good data and publications in spite of very tough conditions. We're all aware of that. Okay, thank you. Wow, I'm looking for a question. We got one at the end. Okay, how do you know where to do the flushing, and how could that process be made more effective? There we go.
Good question. That's a good question. All right, let's just think of it. You have it's, let's say, 10 miles by or let's say 8 kilometers by 3 kilometers of oiled habitat. Somewhere in that oiled habitat, you have to do work. We hired contractors to do that. The contractors were very upset and said, well, you got to go out, your SCAT teams have to go out, and we have 3, maybe 4 SCAT teams, maximum of 5 guys. You have to go tell us where it is. We turned that around and said, no, that's not our job. Your job is to find the oil there. And then you have 1,000 workers, 1,000 guys, 800 from the local community. You go out and dig and find where that oil is. You put a shovel in there, look in that pit, and say, yes, we're going to reduce the oil within that pit if it's greater than 25% coverage. So we put it on the contractors to go out, and they found, after they're messing around for a long time, that they need a mini SCAT team. They need their own eyes and ears to go out and pre-assess the grid before they start work. So they pre-assess the grid. They tell their flushing operators that's where the oil is, and that's where they try to go to work. We still find that they may chintz it. They may take shortcuts and say, oh, yes, they report to us. and they say the area is all clean and it's ready to be assessed. And the crew goes out there and they either missed it or didn't do anything, and they kind of mislead us, trying to get away with doing less work than is required. But we have a very diligent SCAT team and they get caught. So the process is to be more effective, and it's difficult to find the oil, and you really have to go out there and put shovels in and find it that way. Maybe Ed's dogs can find it, but there's oil everywhere. So
Yeah,
the dog is going to be overloaded.
Yeah, the person that asked that question has this kind of interesting technology, and it's a polarized infrared camera, and we've been with them. And if there's free oil, and it can't find oil in the sediments, but if the sediments get saturated and there's free oil in that sediments, even a small sheen that comes out of that sediments will be clearly seen with this polarized infrared camera. So there may be an opportunity for that camera to do really, synoptic kind of analysis of a large area very quickly to tell you where to kind of pinpoint additional kind of detailed shovel digging kind of things. And anyway, maybe that's something we can talk about.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it briefly, because if you go out there and you look at the water, you may see a slight sheen. You walk through it, and we have on our SCAT sheet, we have sheen detected in footprints. Yes, you'll detect it in the footprint. You have to stir it up is the problem.
Well, if this technology sees sheen, invisible sheen, it'll see that even because it changes the emissivity of the water surface. And so so anyway, it's something maybe we could talk about offline, but there may be an opportunity to deploy. We're looking at that technology for shoreline assessments kind of immediately after a spill, but this is longer term. But if there's free oil in this just below the surface, and you get a high water event with a high tide and some of the oil comes out of sediment, I think you'll see where the hot spots are.
These areas are flooded every day, twice a day.
Okay, well,
so these are something. Yeah, come on over when we get stabilized. Bring it over.
Yeah, I'll talk to this person. I'm trying to do my privacy job here. I'm not saying his name, but maybe we can set up a meeting with the three of us. All right, another one. Eric, good presentation. What do you feel are the pros and cons of burning oil on the shoreline, assuming that the oil still has enough light ins to burn?
Yeah, I did a spill in Turkey where I was in charge of it, and they put me in charge of the burning operation. So I had some experience, Al. I didn't want to, get into that at all, but there's not enough oil in these shorelines in Nigeria to do that. Well, gosh, you know what? I'm thinking of just the mangrove, the habitat. I mean, the oil was thick, but then I come in, twice a day and just spreads it around, so you get the very thin layers. So you really have to collect it. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in burning where as possible, but I'm not sure it would really do it there. The light ends are all gone. They're all gone. It's not. It's kind of the mid-range. All the lights below, I want to say C16, C18 are not present, and there's no odor from it. Very little odor. So.
Okay. All right. I think we're getting close to the end of our time slot here, but we got a couple questions. We should consolidate Matula data review and lessons learned for IOC 2024. You can see who's telling you that.
I think it's a great idea. Yep, I'm all for it.
And squeeze in a Jan-Feb 2024 site visit. There you go. That's summertime, I guess, down there.
It's my favorite place. It's gorgeous down there.
Okay.
Very pretty.
And then let's go with the last question here. It's almost out of time. How do you prevent oil mixing with suspended sediments during flushing, then sinking?
Good question. Good question. Well, we can't. There's no way to prevent the mixing with the sediments that come out. We've looked at the areas adjacent to the shoreline where it's still in the intertidal, and we have requirements to go in there and flush it. But we don't know how much oil is at the bottom of the channel. There is circulation, and we don't know. So there is some mixing with suspended sediments that we don't know at this time. We've thought of various ways to go take a look at it, but we're busy with the shoreline and the intertidal areas right now.
So, but it's not enough to cause some kind of narcosis event or anything like that.
No. And you know, we've seen the fishermen are coming back, the fish are coming back, so the fishermen are coming back. We've seen, we've got a snail that's more prevalent than before, and that's used as a food source. We see more and more people out there, more and more birds. But these are all anecdotal evidence of improvement. You can actually, you can see and feel it. People that hadn't been out there for 2 or 3 years, they say, oh my God, what a change. I mean, you got plants growing, the oil is gone, the birds are back, the fishermen are there. It's really a sight to see. And we have severe critics that come out and are impressed.
Yeah, and then you get arsonists come out.
Right.
Okay, well,
Right.
listen. Once again, I'm impressed by your experiences and then your ability to articulate those experiences. So this is a fantastic job. I think we got through all the questions, which it's almost always takes us a half an hour, and we actually get through all the questions and we never leave any. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending, and stay tuned. As I said, next month we will have Robert Lim, the CEO of OSRL, give a talk about his experience as well. So Eric, thank you so much, and have a good week.
Great. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.